from somewhere out there. This is Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie.
I'm looking forward to tonight. My guest, Dr. Eugene Mallove. He heads up a nonprofit organization called New Energy Foundation. We'll talk about that in just a moment. But more importantly, we're also going to be talking about several different kinds of possibly alternative energy systems. Cold fusion, of course, which has to do with hydrogen. Then there's called vacuum energy, which is zero-point energy. And then there's environmental energy, energy from really sensible thermal energy that you would be able to find. And there's some incredible stories, too. There was an individual named Joseph Popp, for example. He invented the noble gas engine. Whatever happened to that? It had no exhaust. It blew up one day, killing one person. We'll talk about that, too. All of that and much more on Coast to Coast AM. Dr. Eugene Mallove is the president of the nonprofit New Energy Foundation, and he has held the position of editor-in-chief of Infinite Energy magazine since 1995. Dr. Mallove holds a Master of Science degree and a Bachelor of Science degree in Aeronautical and Astronautical Engineering from MIT, and a Science Doctorate in Environmental Health Sciences from Harvard University. Dr. Mallove has experience in high-technology engineering companies, including Hughes Research Laboratories, the Analytic Science Corporation, and MIT Lincoln Laboratory. Since 1991, he has worked as a consultant to corporations and investment firms doing and planning R&D in new energy. He has taught science journalism at MIT and at Boston University, and he was chief science writer at the MIT News office when cold fusion erupted. And prior to that, he was a top science writer and broadcaster with the Voice of America in Washington, D.C. He's also the author of 3 science books and has written several science and technology articles for magazines and newspapers. Knows what he's talking about. Dr. Mallove, welcome to Coast. How are you?
Absolutely delighted to be on your program, George, and I'm fine here in New Hampshire, 2 a.m., of course, a little after.
It was interesting tonight where John Kerry, in one of his acceptance speeches in the 5 states that he took tonight, said that cars should be built in Detroit, but we shouldn't be taking oil from the Middle East anymore. It sure would be better if we just develop a different form of fuel, wouldn't it?
Absolutely, except the great problem with statements that many of the candidates have been making are that they refer only to what you might call conventional alternative energies, such as solar power, wind power, and the so-called hydrogen power that they talk about. Hydrogen power, in the conventional sense, is only an energy storage mechanism. It is not an energy source per se, unless you get the hydrogen from fossil fuels, which some of the fuel cell people are talking about. In order to make hydrogen from water by conventional means, you need much greater energy from some other source like nuclear power, standard nuclear power, or solar power, or something else. So a lot of what one hears the candidates in this presidential quest talking about may sound good and green, so to speak, but it is actually not very productive at all.
And to those who aren't in the know or study or read or even listen to programs like this or words that you speak, they will hear this rhetoric and they'll go, oh, this is great. Yep. You know, I'm all behind this person.
That's right, indeed. In fact, I can tell you of a very interesting experience we had recently. Almost as a hobby, because I don't really expect much from presidential candidates of any party or of any stripe. We are not nonprofit New Energy Foundation, of course, has to be nonpartisan. I do have my own political views, but they're not important. But I do go out from time to time, and I look at the presidential candidates, because in New Hampshire that's very easy to do. You just turn around and there's another one standing there. But basically, I go to various events and try to raise the question of really new energy, what we're talking about, the kind of things that you introduced, cold fusion, which is better called low-energy nuclear reactions now, vacuum energy or ether energy, and even a profound environmental energy, sort of violations or extensions of the second law of thermodynamics, things that will lead to truly remarkable infinite energy sources that do not rely on the normal limitations of windmills and conventional solar power. So I recently asked, there were 3 candidates at a forum, and this was on January 9th in Concord, and I posed a question which the moderator so kindly asked the candidates. He basically said this: would you support an office within the United States Department of Energy to evaluate what might be called unconventional energy sources, not merely renewable sources such as wind power, but such things as cold fusion, so-called zero-point or vacuum energy? 30 seconds, okay? And we had 3 candidates. There were only 3 at this particular forum, and they gave their answers, and each one had a positive response. Of course, they didn't really know precisely what we were talking about.
They're hoping they're answering it the right way.
Right. May I quote what Edward said?
You may, sure.
Because it shows that even though the spirit is there, the knowledge isn't. And if we could only get the knowledge in, and perhaps by a program such as we're having now, listeners out there visiting other primaries will actively introduce the same kind of question into the arena, and will actually get these guys to talk about it. Here's what Edwards said. Before I answer that question, I want these 2, and he turned to Lieberman and Kucinich, tell me what the definition of cold fusion to 0 point is. And then the audience laughed. Yeah, I got a feeling, listening to those answers, the 2 previous ones, that they don't have any idea of what it is. Okay. Then Kucinich got up and whispered something to Edwards, and then Edwards continued. Yes, of course, and the answer is yes. I would support an office that worked on alternative sources of energy. That's the answer to the question. And there we have it.
And there it was.
Right.
Nice and vague and marshmallowy.
Right. Well, yeah. Hey, listen, Clinton in that very same room, Bill Clinton, before he was nominated, long before he was nominated, this was January 1992, in that very same room in Concord, New Hampshire, had given a much more precise answer to my then almost exclusive focus on the cold fusion matter, and he actually kind of knew what it was, and he knew that the Department of Energy was stonewalling even his scientists in Arkansas. So he knew what was going on and still did nothing.
I'll tell you what, Doctor, in one of the big problems, as we all know, which eventually this nation is going to have to recognize, is the tremendous power and clout of oil companies in this country that control destiny. And as you well know, Eisenhower once said a long, long time ago that we need to be aware of the industrial military complex. And his fear always is those companies that benefited by war would indeed be in charge. And darn if he wasn't right.
Well, yeah, he was right in many respects, but he was a slightly off target. His rifle, he was probably a good soldier and a good marksman, but his shot in that particular speech was slightly off, in that what we really have today, I would say, not so much the oil companies opposing this. In fact, they're not really. As far as they're concerned, it's dead. But actually academic and government complex. The academic-government complex is what did in, so to speak, the proper evaluation and continued research into the initial announcement of cold fusion back on March 23rd, 1989.
But is there an anti-cold fusion lobby that might be funded by big oil companies?
No, not at all.
Okay.
There's an anti-cold fusion lobby that is funded regularly by Uncle Sam. And I don't want to make too much of this. Some of my subscribers have advised me on this program going on before to accentuate the positive, and I will accentuate the positive and tell.
Well, no, don't you hold back.
But I want to tell you
for 3 hours tonight.
But we need, okay, fine, but we do need some background here, because after all, I myself was a very conventional, mainstream, so to speak, thinker in science prior to March 23rd, 1989, and even for a year after March 23rd, 1989, when I was trying to determine for myself the truth or falsity of the claims from Drs. Pons and Fleischmann and their people who replicated or were claiming to replicate their results.